Hello everyone. Thank you for coming back to our channel. In this video, we will be discussing the next chapter of Manhwa comic titled Return of the Blossoming Blade, or Return of the Mount Hua sect. Let's go to chapter 6. Enjoy watching this video. The group of intruders arrived at the sect leader's residence and started shouting one after another, demanding the sect leader to come out immediately and stop running away. The moment the sect leader's room opened, everyone's attention turned to the door, and silence fell over the crowd. Confidently, Mount Hua sect leader stood in front of them and asked why they had come so late at night. Chung Myung, who was observing the situation, thought that the sect leader truly embodied the essence of the sect leader of Mount Hua sect. Every movement and way of speaking exuded a sophisticated aura. One of the intruders couldn't contain his frustration and shouted, questioning why the cult leader was trying to act calm about the situation. Chung Myung confirmed his previous suspicions, thinking that the cult leader was just trying to act cool. A fat man in a red robe, who seemed to be the leader of the group of intruders, greeted the sect leader and asked how he was doing. The sect leader acknowledged pavilion owner Gong's unexpected presence and expressed his surprise at Gong's arrival in person. Gong chuckled and explained that he felt uncomfortable having to visit them for such business. He mentioned that he didn't want to climb Mount Hua again if possible, but because many people requested his presence, he was forced to come here. Gong emphasized that the sect leader needed to understand the reasons behind these people's concerns, as the agreed date had long passed. The sect leader closed his eyes in contemplation, and Gong continued to speak, stating that they had tried to understand Mount Hua sect's situation several times. He said that if they had followed the contract strictly, they would have demanded payment for breaking the promised date. However, because of the debt they felt towards Mount Hua sect, they would try not to be too harsh. Gong set a time limit of 7 days, stating that if the sect leader couldn't pay him back within that time, they would confiscate the Mount Hua sect's temple. The conversation between Gong and the sect leader was interrupted by a hiccup, and everyone turned their attention to the source. Chung Myung stood there, covering his mouth. Gong comments that it seems like he has let the kids see something they shouldn't see. Back at the dorm, Chung Myung asks if the dealer is from Huayin Prefecture. The student confirmed it, and Chung Myung pondered silently. Seeing Chung Myung's reaction, the student thought that he should probably stay away from Chung Myung, unsure of what he would do. Zhou Gol then asked his student whether Huayin Prefecture was the name of the village under Mount Hua. The student answered firmly, remembering the name from his days selling with his father. Zhou Gol questioned whether that meant Mount Hua sect had borrowed money from the merchants. The student admits that he is not sure about it, but he knows about Gong, the owner of Tahuo Pavilion in Huayin Prefecture. He revealed that Gong was a wealthy merchant who was involved in various business ventures. Chung Myung, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up, asking whether Gong was the owner of Tahuo Pavilion. Zhou Gol and his students look shocked, realizing that Chung Myung's expression is far from normal, and they ask him to calm down. Chung Myung scoffs at their pleas, asking if they are telling him to calm down. His mind raced, realizing that Tahuo Pavilion originally belonged to Mount Hua sect. With a firm grip on his disciple's collar, Chung Myung asked if the man was really the owner of Tahuo Pavilion and if he was trying to confiscate Mount Hua sect's temple after lending them money. The student, with tears in his eyes, confirmed that that was indeed what happened. Chung Myung released his grip on his student and pondered the situation. He thought something was wrong. It was strange that Tahuo Pavilion, which originally belonged to Mount Hua sect, would lend them money. He realized that since things didn't make sense, they were most likely headed in the wrong direction all along. Chung Myung calls Zhou Gol, who answers nervously, not sure what to expect. Chung Myung orders him to bring that thing. Confused, Zhou Gol looks at Chung Myung, who repeats his request for that thing. Suddenly, Zhou Gol realizes what it is and hurriedly promises to bring it immediately. As he takes the black uniform and hands it to Chung Myung, Zhou Gol can't help but ask what he wants to do with it. Chung Myung, now wearing new clothes, began to explain the concept behind his actions. He refers to an old saying in Buddhist literature that advocates the need to go against existing norms. He stressed that to truly follow the path of the Tao, one must be willing to go against it, even if that means going against revered figures such as Buddha or the ancestors. Covering his head and face with a mask, Chung Myung stood ready in his new clothes and declared his intention to seek the true path of Tao. This statement shocked Jo Gul and his students, who expressed their disbelief and concern. They questioned Chung Myung's plans to leave the sect's temple dressed like that, calling him a crazy bastard. Chung Myung jumped over the wall, his eyes looking at the brightly lit buildings in the distance. Laughter echoed from inside the building. Inside, a group of merchants who trespassed into Mount Hua sect, demanding payment of their debts, were holding a celebration. One of the men commented on the sect leader's confused expression, while others expressed no surprise, stating that they had essentially given the sect their final warning. One of the merchants directed his attention towards Gong, noticing that the sect leader seemed even more confused because Gong, the pavilion owner, was present. Gong admitted that as a profit-seeking trader, he felt sorry for the predicament they were currently facing. He expressed regret, recalling the long positive relationship they had enjoyed for generations. The man who questions Gong reassures him, recognizing his efforts and generosity, assuring him that everyone will praise his generosity. Gong responded in a hopeful tone, expressing his wish for that to happen, followed by a hearty laugh. After taking the sip of the liquor, Gong reflected on the carefree nature of the merchants before him. He admired their ability to live with such simplicity, but he understood that Mount Hua sect's strength was not something to be underestimated. The true strength of this sect lay not in their combat prowess, but rather in their long history. In Shanxi province, it was difficult to find someone who had no ties to Mount Hua sect. However, Gong notes that recently, the sect has become much weaker. He compared it to a delicate duck whose skin was easily torn apart with even a little force from chopsticks. Suddenly, one of the men asks Gong a question, asking about his plans for the temple after they confiscated it from the Mount Hua sect. He suggested that selling it might be difficult, so perhaps they could take something else from the sect. Gong confidently replies that the value of the temple is beyond their imagination. Even though at first glance it looks like an old temple, it guarantees its greatness. The man who asked the question laughed, admitting his lack of understanding. He asked Gong for clarification. As Gong stuffed the food into his mouth, he secretly thought that all these merchants were idiots. Gong gently placed the chopsticks on the table and began to explain his plan. He conveyed that he couldn't reveal all the details directly, but they could use Mount Hua sect's enemies to their advantage. He suggested that many sects would take advantage of this opportunity and be willing to spend large amounts of money to acquire the temple, solely to wipe out Mount Hua sect's existence. Gong reassures them not to worry and promises to ensure that everyone's investment will be worthwhile. The people present looked at Gong in awe, and one of them stood up, recognizing his wisdom. Filled with joy and approval, they all raised their glasses in unison. A toast proposed to Pavilion Master Gong, and they happily clinked their glasses, cheering their joint efforts. As one of the merchants walks alone on the street, he enjoys the joy of the party. Thoughts raced through his mind, contemplating the great wealth he could gain from Mount Hua sect. He believed that pavilion owner Gong had a careful approach to money matters, thus further increasing his confidence. Delighted and under the bright moonlight, the merchant expressed his satisfaction. However, his excitement quickly subsided when he looked up and realized that there was no moon in the sky. Dismissing it as a new moon, he reasoned it would be safer to walk through the main streets on such nights. Just then, he saw a blurry figure ahead. Squinting his eyes, the merchant saw someone standing before him. None other than Chung Myung, whose face was covered by a mask. Chung Myung called the trader, ordering him to stop. In his drunken stupor, the merchant's mind wanders, viewing Chung Myung as a strange thief who seems to have just stepped out of the picture. He couldn't help but find it strange that the thieves were dressed so flashily, as if they were announcing their intentions to the whole world. The merchant is surprised by Chung Myung's presence and questions whether he is a thief. Chung Myung assures him that he is not interested in money and just wants answers. He promised that if the merchant would cooperate, he would be left unharmed. The merchant seemed unafraid and said that he didn't have much choice in the matter. He then revealed with a smile that he had several friends accompanying him. indicating that he was not alone. A moment later, half a dozen guards appeared, surrounding the merchant. Observing the guards, Chung Myung comments that they look like high-class bodyguards. One of the guards questions their actions, suggesting the possibility of killing Chung Myung. But the trafficker suggested that they arrest him and make sure that he could still talk. As the bodyguard attacks Chung Myung, the merchant thinks that he is not a fan of violent scenes, while contemplating the situation. The merchant grimaced at the painful cries he heard, realizing that the level of force used seemed excessive. Suddenly, a loud noise caught his attention, and he turned around, assuming that Chung Myung had been defeated. He expressed his frustration, reminding them that he had specifically instructed them to make sure Chung Myung could still talk. However, to his surprise, the scene before him was completely different from his expectations. Chung Myung stands unscathed, while all of Gong's guards lie on the ground. With the final throw of the last guard, Chung Myung comments on the importance of people understanding what others are saying to them and the consequences of refusing to do so. Chung Myung called to the merchant, gesturing for him to come closer. He repeated his offer, stating that if the merchant answered his questions, he would be released unharmed. The frightened merchant stuttered in agreement. Grabbing the merchant by the collar and clenching his fists, Chung Myung delivered a warning. He explains that if the merchant had only answered his questions at first, he would have let him leave unharmed. However, since the traitor chose to fight back, he will now face the consequences. Chung Myung looks at the merchant, takes a punching stance, and confidently declares that he will make sure the merchant can still talk after their meeting. That is the end of Chapter 6, so now let's next to Chapter 7. After some time passed, the merchant's mouth swelled, resembling a pig's mouth. He began to explain the situation to Chung Myung. Chung Myung, who was interested in the merchant's statement, questioned him further. He asked if it was true that they had lent more than 100,000 naing to Manhwa sect. The merchant hesitated to confirm, afraid of Chung Myung's reaction. In a firm tone, Chung Myung expressed his disbelief. He stated that even if he sold everything the merchant had, including their underwear, he would not be able to raise 10,000 naing, let alone 100,000. He pointed out the absurdity of the claim, stating that the Manhwa sect was on the verge of collapse, making the loan even more dubious. The trader attempted to provide an explanation, stating that high interest rates work in a certain way. According to him, when money is lent at high interest, the interest will continue to accumulate as long as the borrower fails to repay it. Over time, the interest will be much higher than the principal amount. Laughing, he added that they could then take the money. Chung Myung interrupted the merchant, hitting him on the head. He firmly expressed his disagreement, emphasizing that such behavior was not something to be proud of. In addition, he questioned the merchant about his claim to be the owner of Hawaiian cloth shop. Hesitantly, the merchant answered, admitting that he was indeed the owner. Chung Myung continued to ask about the chronology of the merchant's ownership, asking when exactly he bought the cloth shop. Confused by the question, the trader asked for clarification, stating that he did not fully understand what Chung Myung was asking. He explained that their family had owned the fabric shop for generations. Chung Myung appears shocked by this revelation, unable to comprehend the merchant's response. Chung Myung pondered the situation, sure that things will not be as they seem. He remembered how the Hawaiian cloth shop, along with other businesses that were thriving in Hawaiian Prefecture, were originally owned by the Manhwa sect. The sect's efforts had played an important role in the development of the prefecture, which was once just a village with a few scattered farms. Although the sect had entrusted the actual management of these businesses to its representatives, it seemed they had taken advantage of the sect's vulnerable condition to take control. Out of anger, Chung Myung started attacking the merchant, who asked him to stop, confused by the sudden attack. Suddenly, he heard someone calling him bastard. When Chung Myung turned around, he was confronted by a guard who had awakened. The guard accused him of a cowardly surprise attack and demanded to know his identity. He identifies himself as Guard Private Jong Bin and says that Chung Myung must have heard of him. Chung Myung apologizes, admitting that he has no knowledge of such things. Confused, he questions why Jong Bin is so interested in his identity. Jung Bin insists that he must at least know the identities of the people who will meet their deaths because of his sword. Ignoring Chung Myung's previous defeat, he considers Chung Myung to be an arrogant bastard. Drawing his sword, Jung Bin prepares to attack while warning Chung Myung to strengthen himself. Chung Myung observes Jung Bin and ponders to himself. He admitted that Jung Bin was undoubtedly stronger than him in terms of pure strength, including inner strength, physical strength, and speed. Chung Myung realized that his own abilities could not be compared to Jung Bin in that aspect. However, he is very confident that this does not make him weaker than Jung Bin. Chung Myung understands that pure strength and speed alone do not determine a person's overall strength in a fight. With determination, Chung Myung hit the sword lying on the ground, skillfully caught it as it flew, and used it to block Jung Bin's sword attack. At that moment, he reflected on his superiority over Jung Bin. He had his past experience as the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. Chung Myung realized that if he lacked pure power, he could borrow it from his opponent. Using the power of Jung Bin's own attack, Chung Myung skillfully redirects it, sending Jung Bin flying backwards. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Chung Myung uses a sword technique that creates the image of a plum blossom, symbolizing his skill, and quickly attacks Jung Bin once again. While doing so, he confidently said, "Come back after practicing more." But a sudden realization dawned on him, and beads of sweat formed on his face as he looked back at the merchant. He pondered, realizing that he had made a mistake and accidentally revealed his sword technique, especially since he had even drawn a plum blossom bud. The merchant's astute observation of his refined and beautiful sword techniques, the high level of martial arts displayed, and the pure Kai that was faintly radiating concerned Chung Myung. He wondered if the merchant had found out his true identity. However, the merchant asked him an unexpected question. The merchant asked if Chung Myung was affiliated with the South Bank sect, and this question confused Chung Myung. After a short pause, Chung Myung confirmed his relationship with the South Bank sect. This confirmation sparked great joy in the merchant, who eagerly offered his assistance and promised to answer any questions to the best of his ability. Surprised by the merchant's enthusiasm, Chung Myung responded with a surprised voice, expressing his gratitude. Inside the Mount Hua sect's dormitory room, Zhou Gul's impatience was increasingly visible as he wondered why it was taking so long. Yun Zhang, who noticed Zhou Gul's anxiety, tried to reassure him, reminding him that Chung Myung was not stupid and would return in time, as long as no accident happened to him. Suddenly, the boarding house door opened, and Chung Myung stepped in. Curiously, he asked the group if anything had happened in his absence. Without delay, Chung Myung began to change his clothes, while Yun Zhang asked his own questions, curious about the important events that occurred outside. Chung Myung answered casually, stating that nothing much had happened. He expressed his gratitude for the good treatment he received and even mentioned receiving some additional money. However, his mind drifted back to the meeting with the merchant who questioned him about his affiliation with the South Bank sect. Inwardly, Chung Myung pondered the situation. He considers it fortunate that the merchant failed to recognize his true identity, but the feeling of bitterness remains. The loss of the plum blossom sword technique meant that it no longer symbolized Mount Hua sect. Chung Myung couldn't help but reflect on the fact that Jongsun Yu, who had spent his entire life in Huayin Prefecture, had failed to connect the sword techniques he witnessed with the famous Mount Hua sect. Zhou Gul's curiosity interrupts Chung Myung's thoughts, prompting him to ask about what he was doing outside the temple. Chung Myung avoided the question, considering it inappropriate for the childlike Zhou Gul to know. Zhou Gul, although intimidated, mustering up the courage to point out that Chung Myung himself is also still a child. Chung Myung brushes off the comment and quickly changes the subject, urging Zhou Gul to gather everyone for training. Zhou Gul, surprised at the prospect of practicing that day, expresses his astonishment. Chung Myung responded firmly, emphasizing that regardless of the weather conditions, be it rain, snow, or wind, they would not miss a single day of training from that day onwards. Even if Mount Hua sect fell, they would not take time off. Zhou Gul's determination grows as he considers his readiness to face the challenge. Zhou Gul states his commitment to quickly gather everyone, only to be interrupted by Chung Myung. who states that he will not be participating in the training session due to other obligations. Yoon Jong voices his concerns to Chung Myung, insisting that the training session will only be effective if Chung Myung is present. Yoon Jong suggests that they can practice alone that day, but for the students to really put in their effort, Chung Myung's presence is necessary. Chung Myung acknowledged Yoon Jong's concerns. As Yoon Jong and Jo Gol prepare to leave the room, Yoon Jong mentions their departure, to which Chung Myung responds with a goodbye. Chung Myung lay on his bed, sighing in frustration. His mind was racing, contemplating the current situation. A replacement representative has taken over the business, and the account books that could prove Mount Hua sect's ownership of those businesses had apparently been destroyed by the Heavenly Demon sect members along with Mount Hua itself. Chung Myung concluded that if the account book was still there, none of this would have happened. He briefly entertained the idea of launching a direct attack to eliminate the merchants responsible, but quickly rejected it, realizing that such an action would only paint the Mount Hua sect as forcing a young child to do wrong. Chung Myung understood the need for a valid reason. He needed a way for Mount Hua sect to avoid paying back the merchants while providing proof that the businesses originally belonged to the sect. However, the challenge he faced was not knowing where to find the necessary reasons and evidence. At that moment, Chung Myung's memory came back. He remembered the account book and how he saw Brother Jang Mun writing in it several times. Every time he entered the room, Jang Mun hurriedly hid the several volumes of account books they had. This memory sparked a thought in Chung Myung's mind. Were there only a few volumes? As Chung Myung got out of bed, determination etched on his face. He kept thinking about the whereabouts of the remaining account books. He couldn't imagine that there would only be a few volumes when Mount Hua sect was managing so much business. He firmly believed that Brother Jang Mun must have hidden the rest somewhere else, and the most reasonable location was a secret storage that only the sect leader had access to. Recalling the rumors he heard about secret keeping, Chung Myung's mind raced. If such a storage area did exist, the entrance would most likely be within the sect leader's residence, which had remained unchanged for many years. Located somewhere on Mount Hua, surrounded by martial arts experts, it must be cleverly hidden, probably hidden in the hills behind the sect leader's residence. Chung Myung speculates that the storage may be underground, to ensure its confidentiality from prying eyes. A smile spread across Chung Myung's face as he realized the enormity of his upcoming endeavor. An unprecedented treasure hunt awaits him, driven by the need to save Mount Hua sect. With great determination, he pushed himself out of his bedroom window. In the air, Chung Myung's thoughts turned to Brother Jang Mun. Even though he intended to break into the warehouse, he silently begged for forgiveness. Saving Mount Hua sect had become his top priority. If possible, he wanted to take the account book and hand it over to the sect leader without laying his own hands on it. That is the end of Chapter 7. So now let's next to Chapter 8. Chung Myung stumbled and fell onto his butt as a powerful explosion echoed through the mountains. He screamed in pain and said that he might die at this rate. Realizing the enormity of the task before him, Chung Myung admitted that searching an entire mountain, even a small hill like this, would not be an easy task. He questioned the feasibility of his approach. He then summoned his inner energy, concentrated it between his hands, and released it towards the ground, hoping to detect a significant empty space that might indicate the presence of a storage room. He believed that such a space would be the key he was looking for. Exhausted and overwhelmed, Chung Myung lay on the ground, gasping for breath. Doubt crept into his mind, causing him to question whether he was in the right location. After taking a short break, Chung Myung decided to try it one last time. Taking a deep breath, he gathered his remaining strength, preparing for the next attempt. Suddenly, a look of astonishment crossed his face, and he stopped his energy projection. Picking up a nearby pickaxe, he felt a surge of excitement. He had found it, the storage room. With new determination, Chung Myung begins to dig, never giving up in his pursuit. He knows that the confirmation he seeks lies beyond the surface, and he is determined to see it with his own eyes. After spending quite some time digging, he found a floor made of bricks, a clear indication that he had indeed achieved his desired goal. Chung Myung's mind raced with excitement and anticipation. He thought of the possibility that this hidden storage place was more than just a building made of bricks, considering that it could potentially hold all of Manhwa's account books and treasures. Holding the brick in his hand, he peeked through the hole, and to his astonishment, he discovered a hidden passage behind it. Filled with a wave of victory, Chung Myung realized that he had found the way to the secret stash. However, his excitement was suddenly interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. To his surprise, it was the cult leader himself who was walking down the hall. Chung Myung realizes that the cult leader must know the hidden safe. As the cult leader arrives at a door and stops, Chung Myung observes carefully, contemplating whether the etched door in front of him is the entrance to the secret depository. Confusion gripped him as he watched the sect leader's hand shake, yet hesitated to take any action. Observing the sect leader, Chung Myung couldn't help but notice the lack of action. He saw a man who looked helpless, unable to change the circumstances that befell the collapsing Manhwa sect. Martial arts studies declined, and the sect's fortunes dwindled. Leading the sect under such circumstances must be an extremely disheartening task. Chung Myung wonders what it would be like to watch the place he has dedicated his entire life to protecting collapse without being able to prevent it. However, the sect leader couldn't reveal these feelings to anyone because he was the one the disciples relied on. As a result, he endured pain and sorrow in solitude, confined in places like this. After the sect leader left, Chung Myung moved the brick, creating a hole to enter the passage. Determined, he walked towards the door and admitted his fault in the situation. However, he believes it is not too late to make changes. With strong determination, he vowed to open the stubborn door and take action. Chung Myung put his hand on the door, channeling his energy towards it with determination. However, to his surprise, the energy he sent into the door was restored. It was then that he realized the truth. The door was made of immortal metal, which was reputed to be the strongest metal in the world. It is said to be more valuable than gold, and is at least a foot thick. Cutting such material would require the skills of the world's strongest masters, and even they would be hard-pressed to make a mark. This revelation explains why the cult leader never attempted to open it. Staring at the seemingly impenetrable door, Chung Myung pondered Brother Jang Mun's martial arts prowess. He knew that Jang Mun's martial arts level was not high enough to penetrate evergreen metal. Chung Myung reasoned that if Jang Mun managed to get through the door, there must be a way to open it. The key lies in discovering the method, and if only Chung Myung can uncover it, he may have a chance to access what lies behind it. Chung Myung's eyes widened as he realized something surprising. He checked the pattern on the wall and recognized it as a knife mark. The moves are similar to the 24 moves plum blossom sword technique, as well as other sword techniques such as the bamboo leaf sword technique and the equilibrium sword technique. Understanding that this sword mark was the key to opening the door, Chung Myung sighed and concluded that it required Violet Dawn fortified Kai. With knowledge of the necessary sword techniques, Chung Myung devises a plan. He would closely follow the marks, starting with the equilibrium sword technique and the bamboo leaf sword technique, then progressing to the 24 moves plum blossom sword technique, culminating in the plum blossom sword dance. This sequence of movements is the key to unlocking the door. However, he pondered how Brother Jang Mun managed to create such a mechanism. Despite understanding the concept, Chung Myung faced significant challenges. He thought about the last remaining problem, how to perform all the techniques himself. It might have happened to him in the past, but now in his current childish state, it seemed impossible. Even though he could imagine those techniques in his mind, executing them with proper inner strength and instant mastery was beyond his current abilities. However, he believes there is a solution, a way to overcome these obstacles. Chung Myung hesitated, expressing his reluctance. He placed his hand on his dantian, the energy center in his body, thinking about the decision he was about to make. Determined, he decided to rest for approximately 1 month and only utilize a small portion of his innate true Kai. Innate true Kai was the life force that everyone was born with, the energy that sustained life. Understanding the consequences that came with using his innate true Kai, Chung Myung steeled himself for what was to come. Despite his doubts, he admitted that he had no other choice in the current situation. With a stern expression, Cheong Myung infused his innate true Kai into his sword, causing blood to drip from his mouth. He knew he only had one chance to succeed. It should be successful in one attempt. The doubts were still there, but he brushed them aside, convincing himself that his body was just reacting strangely due to the unusual situation. There will be no second chance. Swinging his sword at the door, blood once again spilled out of his mouth. The weight of the task weighed heavily on him. He realized the difficulties he faced, limited by the limitations of his body and the limits of his inner strength. With unwavering determination, Cheong Myung intensified the infusion of his innate true Kai into the sword, refusing to give up. He understood that he could not stop, whatever the circumstances. Swinging his sword with unrelenting force, Cheong Myung progressed through the equilibrium sword technique, transitioned smoothly to the bamboo leaf sword technique, and then executed the 24 moves plum blossom sword technique without pause. Each movement flowed seamlessly into the next, showing his unwavering determination. At that moment, he accepted his identity as the Plum Blossom Sword Saint. As he completes the complicated sequence, Cheong Myung's energy reaches its peak, but the pressure takes over. He fell to the ground and blood spurted from his mouth. Looking up, he wondered if his efforts had paid off. The door began to emit a shining light, accompanied by a clear clicking sound. Cheong Myung's eyes were fixed on the door that slowly opened in front of him, giving rise to a wide smile of victory. However, his joy didn't last long, because blood came out of his mouth again, reminding him of the impact it had on his body. With a mixture of satisfaction and pain, Cheong Myung admitted that he would most likely be bedridden for at least 2 months due to the stress he was under. The burden of saving Mount Hua sect weighed heavily on him, triggering the resigned thought that it was a troublesome task. Nevertheless, his expression changed to a smile as he stepped forward, opened the door, and passionately declared his intention to discover what Brother Jang Mun was hiding beyond his boundaries. That is the end of Chapter 8. So now let's next to Chapter 9. Cheong Myung enters the secret storage area, seeing 3 bookshelves. It was smaller than he had anticipated, but he reasoned that a large vault made of immortal metal would be a luxury that only the largest sects in the world could afford. Taking a book off the shelf, he mutters to himself about Brother's claim about a lack of funds, guessing that those costs must have gone into creating this storage room. When Cheong Myung examines the book, he is shocked by what he finds. With growing excitement, he realized that he had found Mount Hua sect's account book. Brother carefully copied the original account book from the Financial and Economic Agency, showing his thoroughness. This discovery was exactly what Cheong Myung needed, a breakthrough that would bring disaster to the traders. A wide grin appeared on his face as he hid the book under his robe. However, he stopped for a moment, and a thought crossed his mind. Was there only paper in this place? Cheong Myung's mind wandered as he thought about the possibility of Brother hiding some money inside the secret storage area. He imagined the potential benefits it could bring, not only for restoring Mount Hua sect's prosperity, but also for indulging his own desires, such as enjoying lots of meat and alcohol. Disappointed by the lack of hidden wealth, he is upset, calling Brother an evil old man who doesn't seem to leave any money behind. Undeterred, Cheong Myung took another book from the second shelf, resigned to reading its contents. To his surprise, it turned out to be a secret technique book. He pondered whether this technique had been used before, realizing that the technique seemed to be a martial arts technique book that had been neglected by the Mount Hua sect. At that time, Cheong Myung speculated about Brother's motives. He concluded that Brother couldn't bring herself to completely abandon the martial arts techniques they had chosen not to pass on to future generations. Instead, he kept it in the secret storage, afraid that throwing it away would have a negative impact on Mount Hua sect in the future. It becomes clear to Cheong Myung that Brother holds tightly to her past and personal attachment and affection for the sect. Reflecting on the arrangement of the shelves, Cheong Myung concluded that the first shelf represented the Mount Hua sect leader's duties. The second shelf symbolized the sect leader's personal relationship and sentimental ties to the sect. Cheong Myung's resolve soared as he reflected on his mission to return the Mount Hua sect to its former glory. He secretly vowed to surpass his previous strength and make him stronger than before. Turning his attention to the third shelf, he saw only one scroll lying there. Wondering if it was the only item on the shelf, he reached out and unrolled it. The words written on the scroll were a heartfelt message left behind by the previous sect leader. The letter contained a message written by the sect leader, addressed to whoever was reading it. It was clear that a new generation had taken over the role of sect leader. With humility, the sect leader left his words in this letter. He emphasized that the Manhwa sect leader's role was not simply to rule the sect, but rather to provide protection and motivation to his disciples, the growing children who form the essence of the sect. The letter urges the reader, now serving as sect leader, to let go of any impatience that comes from the responsibility of leadership. The Manhwa sect had an indomitable will and spirit that no one could control or guide. Whether in up or down periods, Manhwa sect will always remain true to itself. The important task entrusted to the sect leader is to ensure the transmission of the sect's will to future generations, preserving its legacy unchanged by cultivating the disciples who will carry it on. As the reader's predecessor and ancestor, the 21st sect leader of the venerable Manhwa sect, Jung Mun, passed down a great responsibility to them. Chung Myung carefully hid the scroll under his robe, expressing slight annoyance at the sect leader's tendency to nag others. He glanced at the storage area one last time, saying that he had not gained much from it, but convinced himself that what he had obtained, the account book, would be enough to get back the stolen Manhwa business. However, just as he was about to turn around and head for the door, something caught his attention. He hesitated, his feet freezing, and turned to check the storage area once more. A thought occurred to him. There was something odd, strange about the arrangement. Chung Myung ponders brother Jung Mun's nature, considering his intense OCD tendencies. The meticulous brother is known for his devotion to symmetry, even placing 2 lamps on either side of his room for perfect balance. However, why did he leave the third shelf almost empty? Suspicion grew within Chung Myung, and he placed his hand on the third shelf, sensing that there was more than met the eye. With determination, he grabbed the entire bookshelf, moving it from its original position. As he put it aside and examined the empty space left behind, a brilliant golden light radiated from within. Chung Myung's instincts were confirmed. He was right. There was no doubt something was hidden within that space, and excitement surged within him. Chung Myung's eyes widened in astonishment as he stared at the incredible sight before him. There lay piles of gold bars, carefully arranged precious swords, and various unknown gems and secret technique books. Overwhelmed by the discovery, he couldn't contain his excitement. Among the gems, he recognized a cat's eye stone, which further added to his astonishment. Chung Myung's face was contorted with a mixture of amusement and greed, as he exclaimed with a lecherous grin, enjoying his newfound wealth. Meanwhile, at the sect leader's residence, the sect leader peeked out the window, realizing that morning had arrived. A heavy sigh escaped his lips as he pondered his upcoming appointment with pavilion owner Gong, which was only 5 days away. The sect leader couldn't help but feel a trace of resentment, in contrast to the seemingly pleasant day outside. However, his reverie was suddenly interrupted by a scream from outside the room. Because of surprise, the cult leader opens the door and finds Ungum standing there. Curious, the cult leader asked the purpose of Ungum's visit. With a shocked expression, Ungum stammered, conveying the urgency of the matter, insisting that the cult leader should see for himself. Confused and curious, the cult leader questions the urgency and purpose of Ungum. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he concludes that Ungum's desperate state must be something very important. Determined to uncover the truth, the cult leader instructs Ungum to take the lead. Ungum nods solemnly, confirming his readiness to guide the cult leader, and together, they embark on a journey to uncover the mysterious events that await them. The sect leader's expression changed from shock to worry when he saw the sect disciple lying on the ground. Anxious, he asked Ungum about what happened to the young students. Ungum hesitates and explains that the students were just doing extra morning practice. Ungum then changes the topic and tells the cult leader that they are almost at their destination. As they approach the location, Ungum calls out to Chung Myung, looking for his whereabouts. Chung Myung appeared from under the tree, his appearance resembling the zombie. When the sect leader saw him, he couldn't hold back his surprise and asked questions, asking about what happened to Chung Myung. With a serious expression, Chung Myung pointed behind the tree, urging the sect leader to focus on something very important before discussing his own conditions. The cult leader, torn between concern for Chung Myung and curiosity about the revelation, reluctantly agrees. Fixated on the direction indicated by Chung Myung, the cult leader pondered what could be so important. As his gaze followed the indicated path, golden light enveloped the faces of the sect leader and Chung Myung, strengthening the atmosphere of anticipation and mystery around the scene. Chung Myung said that he discovered these things by accident. Astonished, the sect leader stuttered, unable to understand how such a treasure could be found. But Chung Myung acted as if he was going to collapse from exhaustion. Seeing Chung Myung's depressed state, the sect leader became worried and quickly assured him that he could go back and rest, deciding not to ask further for details. The sect leader's attention was drawn back to the incredible treasures that lay before him. The gold bars glittered, captivating his gaze. He then noticed the books in the other chest and realized the significance of the discovery. The Hun Prefecture business account book of the venerable Mount Hua sect. Realizing the immense value and importance of these records, the sect leader hesitated to handle them carelessly, afraid of causing irreparable damage. As the cult leader's gaze shifted to another basket of books, his curiosity got the better of him. When he opened the books, he discovered something that shook him deeply. The sect leader's entire body shook, and within seconds, he began to convulse, foam forming at his mouth. Overwhelmed by what he found, the cult leader collapsed, fainting from the enormity of the revelation. Witnessing this scene, Ungum rushed to the sect leader's side, calling out to him in alarm. The cult leader's excitement and determination were evident as he regained consciousness and rose to his feet. He exclaimed in astonishment upon realizing that the book found contained records of the revered Seven Blossom Plum Sword technique. He asked Ungum about the chest, and after confirming that the chest was indeed brought, the cult leader instructed Ungum to fetch Hyun Young, the leader of the financial and economic agency. As Hyun Young examined the books with trembling hands, he confirmed the authenticity of the notes. His voice trembled with excitement as he assured the sect leader of the accuracy of its contents. Additionally, he had secured the verification documents hidden beneath the treasure. These documents, originating from the government, would be irrefutable proof of the book's legitimacy. With the validation documents in his possession, the cult leader realized the far-reaching implications of this discovery. Not only could they establish the credibility of the contents of the book, but they could also quickly reclaim the business of Tahuo Pavilion and Huayin Prefecture, which rightfully belonged to the Mount Hua sect. A feeling of relief washed over him as he reflected on the positive events. He couldn't help but attribute this new prosperity to the decision to accept a certain child into the Mount Hua sect. In his mind, the child represented a sign of good fortune for the sect. With new determination, the sect leader stilled his shaking hands and rose to his feet. He realized the urgency of the situation and understood the need to confront the parties responsible for the accounting. With a firm tone, he issued an order to include all personnel involved in the business accounting of Great Hua Mountain, Huayin Prefecture. A few days later, the merchant group was on their way to Mount Hua sect, and fatigue and frustration were starting to get to them. One of the traders expressed his exhaustion and begged the other traders to stop pushing them, for fear that he would trip and fall. Gong, the leader of the merchant group, looks back and encourages everyone to hold on, realizing that they are not far from their goal. Zhang Xinyu, one of the merchants who previously faced Chung Myung's wrath, couldn't wait to receive payment from the sect and vowed never to return to this mountain again. He then heard two merchants discussing, the first merchant thinking about the sudden summons by the sect leader. Second merchant speculated that the sect leader might have already prepared money for them. Gom, who was leading the group of merchants, continued to walk forward, expressing his belief that the cult leader's intention in calling them earlier was to beg for mercy. He doubted the sect leader could raise such a large amount of money in a short time, and saw no point in prolonging the situation until the promised date. He concluded that the sect leader wanted to resolve this issue quickly. One of the traders, the Kohen Gong, scoffed at the cult leader's audacity to call them just to ask for leniency. The trader expressed his disgust at the shameless behavior of a debtor. Gong, however, reminds the group to exercise restraint in their words, admitting that although the sect leader is experiencing financial difficulties, he is still the leader of the renowned Mount Hua sect. Meanwhile, Jong Sin-yu was thinking about something swirling in his mind. He couldn't help but think about the possibility that they might not receive the money as promised. He pondered the importance of someone from the South Bank sect visiting this area, showing interest around the Mount Hoa temple. The prospect of receiving a payment of 5,000 gave him hope, as it could potentially secure his financial future and relieve him of the burden of running his shop. The moment the merchants reached the gates of Mount Hoa sect, conflicting emotions rose within them. They are torn between financial interests and the realization that their actions could potentially bring down the venerable sect that has protected Huayin Prefecture for centuries. They understood that if they withheld payment from the sect leader today, Mount Hua sect would soon collapse within a week. Despite their inner turmoil, the merchants decided to climb Mount Hua, driven by the urgent need to recover the large sums of money owed to them, which had accumulated over time. They couldn't ignore how urgent their financial situation was, even if it meant contributing to the sect's decline. At the gate, Wanam greeted the traders and acknowledged their arrival. He told them that the sect leader was looking forward to their presence and guided them to follow him, leading the way deeper into the Mount Hua sect. The merchants, led by Gong, stood before Mount Hua sect leader, who welcomed them with gratitude for answering his call and making the journey up the mountain. Gong expressed their humility and stated that it was natural for them to visit the cult leader, even though they had busy schedules. The sect leader chuckled at that remark and suggested drinking a cup of tea to relieve their fatigue. However, Gong interrupted, expressing his desire to get straight to the point without formalities. The sect leader remained calm and agreed to his request. He admitted that even though he had tried to reach various people and places, he had not succeeded in finding anyone willing to lend him money. Therefore, he explained that he would not be able to pay his debts within the expected time period. Gong, with a grin on his face, responds to the cult leader's pleas by stating that they have been given enough time. As a profit-driven trader, he emphasized their inability to grant further extensions. In response, the cult leader humbly bowed to the merchant, and explaining the difficulties in paying the entire debt, he proposed the possibility of partial repayment. He earnestly appealed to anyone present who might personally be willing to extend the payment date, hoping for understanding and support. Chung Myung, observing the cult leader's actions and attitude, pondered his true intentions and abilities. He admitted that he still couldn't fully understand whether the cult leader's behavior was intended to discourage the merchants or whether it was purely an attempt to be friendly. However, there is one thing that is still certain in Chung Myung's mind. He believed that Hyun Jong, the sect leader, was not as simple as he seemed. Chung Myung realized that the most important quality a cult leader must have was calm. Considering Mount Hua sect had a foundation rooted in martial arts, wise decision-making should come naturally, especially for the sect leader. Chung Myung questions whether Hyun Jong has the qualities and abilities necessary to be a proper cult leader. Gong sighed, expressing his frustration at the sect leader's persistence. He reminded the sect leader that he had clearly stated his inability to extend the payment deadline. However, before Gong could continue, the sect leader interrupted, clarifying that his request was not only directed at pavilion owner Gong. Instead, he acknowledged the unique debt owed to each person present. The sect leader humbly admitted that the total debt accumulated by Mount Hua sect amounted to 100,000 naing. He understood that he owed a great debt to everyone present. Therefore, he appealed to the audience, asking for their kindness in allowing the payment to be postponed. Gong, irritated by what he perceives as the sect leader's manipulative tactics, questions whether the sect leader has the means to immediately repay those who refuse to comply with his demands. However, there was a moment of silence before the sect leader answered. He admitted that although Mount Hua sect had declined significantly compared to its past glory, they still had reliable resources. Although they couldn't collect the entire 100,000 naing, they could collect a portion of it. Solemnly, the sect leader appealed to the audience, chanting Mount Hua sect's name, promising to repay the debt of those who would show mercy to the sect on this day. Gong, unable to contain his frustration, interrupted the sect leader's words, expressing his disbelief and questioning whether the sect leader knew what he was talking about. However, before Gong continued his protest, Zhang Xinyu, one of the merchants present, asked the sect leader a question. Zhang Xinyu asked for clarification on whether postponing the payment date would indeed guarantee the sect's repayment in the future. The sect leader confirmed Zhang Xinyu's understanding, and this response prompted Zhang Xinyu to ask further. He pointed out the dangerous state of the Mount Hua sect, emphasizing the risks involved in believing the sect leader's words and delaying payment. Zhang Xinyu questions anyone's motivation to comply with the sect leader's offer. In response, the sect leader looked at Zhang Xinyu's gaze and spoke with conviction. He stated that taking him at his word and agreeing to the delay in payment was not just for personal gain, but for the sake of Mount Hua sect and its history. He believed that this noble cause should be enough to inspire obedience. However, Gong, who was filled with mockery, laughed out loud. He openly expressed his disbelief and stated that the sect leader was unreasonable in his expectations. Undeterred, the sect leader maintained his composure and calmly challenged Gong's statement, questioning whether he was the one truly being unreasonable. The sect leader's commanding voice resounded as he asked a question to everyone present. What did Mount Hua sect mean to every individual gathered there? Is the name and rich history of this sect worthless? He challenged anyone who dared to take Mount Hua sect's name lightly or ignore its extraordinary legacy. Although the sect experienced decline over the years, it remained an integral part of Huayan Prefecture, sharing its energy and spirit from generation to generation. In the midst of an atmosphere full of tension, Gong steps forward, offering suggestions for dealing with the situation. He proposed distribution based on willingness to personally postpone the repayment date. Those who are willing to delay will gather on one side, while those who are not willing to delay will remain where they stand. However, he emphasized that everyone will be responsible for their own actions. Those who choose to delay payment will not receive protection from the Merchant Alliance, even if they ultimately fail to receive their payment. With this proposal, Gong called on the audience to choose their stance and express their choice. The merchants stood frozen in doubt, unwilling to part with their debt to Mount Hua sect. Gong, smiling confidently, spoke to the sect leader, indicating that none of the merchants would be willing to delay payment personally. However, his words were cut off when Zhang Xinyu stepped forward, showing his willingness to give the Mount Hua sect more time for the repayment of his debt. Gong's disbelief was obvious as he exclaimed, calling out Zhang Xinyu's name. He couldn't understand the shop owner's actions and questioned him loudly, demanding an explanation. In response, Zhang Xinyu begs Gong not to judge him based on his decision, admitting that he realizes the folly of his choice. But he reminded Gong that as someone who was not from Huayan Prefecture, pavilion owner might not fully understand the importance and loyalty of the locals towards Mount Hua sect. Zhang Xinyu passionately expressed the deep connection and respect the people of Huayan Prefecture had for the Mount Hua sect. He emphasized that growing up in the prefecture meant constantly hearing stories and aspirations about joining the Mount Hua sect and becoming the world's greatest martial arts master. Even those who realize that they do not have the talent to enter this sect still deeply respect its history and the protection it has given to the world and Shaanxi province. Gong, still in disbelief, questioned Zhang Xinyu about his sudden anger. However, Zhang Xinyu continued to explain that his experience was not unique, as previous generations had also grown up with the same respect for the Mount Hua sect. He underlined that the Mount Hua sect was not just a martial arts sect, but was the pride of Shaanxi province and Huayan Prefecture. To the traders, Zhang Xinyu warned them that if they left after receiving the money, they would lose out in the long run. He emphasized that although they could easily spend their money elsewhere, he, as a lifelong resident of Huayan Prefecture, had no other place to go with the money he would receive. Gong, who still belittles Zhang Xinyu's decision, questioning him about handing over large sums of money for what he considers to be trivial reasons. He warned Zhang Xin that he would definitely regret his choice. He realized that his previous mindset was only focused on receiving money and enjoying a life free from work. He knew this was probably a big mistake, but he mustered up the courage to speak up. Zhang Zhenyu explained that he already had enough money to support himself, and even if he did not receive the money he was owed, he could consider it a small regret. However, if he was responsible for the collapse of the Mount Hua sect, it would haunt him for the rest of his life, regardless of any wealth he might have accumulated. He didn't want to live a life burdened by such regrets. Gong just laughed at Zhang Zhen's decision, thinking it was stupid. He expressed his indifference, stating that nothing would change even if one person chose not to take the money. However, his amusement quickly turned to surprise when more and more merchants began to walk aside, joining Zhang in offering extended terms for Mount Hua's debt repayment. The sect leader, witnessing Zhang Zenyu's act of support, felt a wave of relief wash over him. He expressed his satisfaction, admitting that there were still individuals who maintained meaningful relationships with the Mount Hua sect. The sect leader ordered Anam to bring out a cart filled with books, which Gong immediately recognized as business account books in Huayan Prefecture. Gong, to his astonishment, realizes the importance of the books and realizes the gravity of the situation. The sect leader spoke to the merchants, emphasizing that despite the benevolence that the Mount Hua sect had shown to them and their ancestors for generations, they had chosen to betray the Mount Hua sect. In a firm proclamation, the sect leader announced that, based on the account books, the Mount Hua sect would take control of the businesses of the merchants and claim all the wealth they had accumulated through them, and not a single coin would be left. That is the end of Chapter 10. Stay tuned for the next one. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. Thank you, everyone.